The settler gang leader Benjamin Netanyahu is visiting his branch office in Washington, D.C. What will it mean for the Middle East? Well, Netanyahu, blunt as always, laid it out before he got on his aircraft. President Trump and I, he said, are going to redraw the map of the Middle East for the benefit of everyone. He didn't, of course, mean everyone. He didn't mean the hundreds of millions of people who live in the Middle East. He meant the well-being of the European settler gangster state that he continues to lead. And as a secondary, he meant in the interests of the United States empire, of which he is a part, but in that order of priority. Just before he left, he closed down the United Nations Relief Works Agency, UNRWA, which is a legal requirement by international law to protect the health, well-being, education, and food security of the Palestinian refugee population. It is an article of membership of the United Nations itself to facilitate and fund the work of UNRWA. Netanyahu just closed it down. Does that mean he'll be leaving the United Nations? Still less likely that he will be kicked out by those that he likes to kick around. But the early signs of what they would like to happen had already been signaled by President Trump when he said that he would tell the governments of Egypt and Jordan that they must take millions of Palestinian refugees. He said from Gaza, but he really meant from Gaza and the West Bank, that they must take them, either for a short time or for the longer term. He helpfully drew a false dichotomy. They intend on the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. That is the redrawn map of the Middle East that Netanyahu has in mind. Of course, it will immediately come up against some practical difficulties of some importance. The first is that if the Palestinians in Gaza did not run away, did not stop resisting after a genocidal Holocaust for almost 16 months that killed and wounded hundreds of thousands of them, maybe far more than we already know, they're not going to leave because Donald Trump would like them to. Ditto in the West Bank, where the genocide is beginning to move up the gears. But secondly, neither Sisi, the dictator of Egypt, or King Abdullah, the reigning Hashemite monarch in Jordan, can possibly afford to say yes to Trump and Netanyahu's plan. And if the population were to be forcibly driven into Jordan and into Egypt, it would instantly bring about the downfall not just of both leaders, but their entire systems. And as both the Egyptian system and the Jordanian system are indispensable parts of the American alliance of treachery in the region, well, that's a pretty big problem. I'm always saying to people, I'll say it again today, I have no doubt, just because Netanyahu and Trump want something to happen does not mean that they have the ability to make it happen. But in the trying to make it happen, big, big events may be unleashed right across the Arab and Muslim world. If you want to discuss these kind of things, you've come to the right place. Have it out with Galloway. Batool Subeiti is a Lebanese-born political analyst with a background in chemical and energy engineering. She's particularly interested in analysing political and social issues, seeking to understand them from their root causes and offering perspectives not typically presented by the mainstream media, which is why she had the good sense to come here, and we're very glad to see her again. Batool, thanks for joining us. Netanyahu's arrived looking like a visiting head of empire. He was received with full military honors in Washington, even though there is an extant warrant for his arrest on suspicion of war crimes and crimes against humanity. How does his visit look to you? What could be in it for the Middle East to see these two sitting down together in the Oval Office?
Right. Thank you very much for having me, George. I think we have to start off with the very basics, and that is that Israel cannot breathe without the American oxygen. I mean, even the ceasefire being put forward on the table, this was Trump imposing it, which shows that ultimately Israel is bound by America's supreme interests here. You know, when Trump comes and says something like he doesn't know if the ceasefire will hold, but that it's Israel's war and not the US's war, you get a sense from this that from Trump, his attitude towards Israel is you do what we say because you cannot survive without us. And we know Trump is someone who doesn't like losers. So from his perspective, you know, the US has been dragged into a very failing and costing war. And the crux of these past 15 months has been that Israel has proven how much of a failure it is. And the significance of Israel's size and the support that it gets from America is dictated by how much Israel is able to really serve America. I mean, $25 billion since October the 7th poured on Israel, and it hasn't managed to achieve any of its goals. And you've spoken quite extensively about, Trump's plan for Gaza. We have to remember that even this depopulation plan that you are speaking of, it comes from a position of failure. Because if we remember, Trump during, in fact, the late days of his election campaign, said something along the lines of Israel is so tiny that it needs to fatten up. This idea that, Israel fattening up would protect it in future wars. So we have to acknowledge that there was this plan A that was put forward by Netanyahu, which he announced in the UN, that you were talking about, the carving of the maps, which he called the New Middle East, that Trump was very well prepared to endorse. Trump was prepared to endorse Netanyahu's territorial expansion under his plan. And that's the scary thing about Trump, is that if Israel was winning on the ground, Trump would be the catastrophe, because he would stamp all of Israel's achievements and he'll give Netanyahu that complete free hand. But the positive aspect over here is that Israel has proven to be a sheer and utter failure. And so, because that plan A failed at the frontline villages in southern Lebanon, which ultimately forced the ceasefire, this is when plan B has been put on the table. And that is ordering an end to the wars in both South Lebanon and Gaza, because we know Trump is a man who dislikes prolonged conflicts and realizes that Israel is a failure. And instead of fattening up Israel as part of Plan A, the shift is now to the demographic threat. Remember, Israel has been suffering a kind of catastrophic existential crisis mode since prior October the 7th, and is really threatened by the demographic threat, in which the Israelis are almost on parity with the Palestinians. And so it's decided that instead of fattening Israel up, because that's not possible, it wants to empty Palestinians in order to manage that Jewish demographic. And as you've mentioned, is part of that ethnic cleansing operation. The thing is, Trump believes he can dictate his orders to countries like Egypt, to countries like Jordan, but I don't think Trump has really sat down and thought through what that might even mean for American interests in the region. What would it mean for the Egyptian and the Jordanian governments to ultimately collapse? Because, as you've mentioned, that could lead to an overthrow. That's how important the Palestinian issue has become. So I think all America would be able to do at the end of the day would be to encourage voluntary immigration for nations to accept the Palestinians. And as part of that, it's creating the most unbearable conditions within Gaza, within the West Bank as well. We're seeing this complete savage campaign, which a part of it is ethnic cleansing, but of course another part of it is also wanting to prevent the development of the resistance within the West Bank, which is even worse for Israel than Gaza is, due to the landmass of the West Bank. and the way that it's opened up to the 1948 Palestine. So we need to put this into perspective that Trump, he comes up with these kind of crazy plans that have no materialization in reality, because it's not even just a question of will those governments accept and will those people rise, but it is exactly as you mentioned, George, the morale and the conviction and the resilience of the Palestinian people after everything they've seen for these 15 months. The last thing they will do is hand it over on a silver platter to their arch enemies, Israeli occupation entity in America, that have been genociding them.
Yes, I mean, even if Trump had in mind brand new, beautiful new housing estates in Egypt and in Jordan, the Palestinians could have had all that if they'd surrendered in 1948. They could be living as second, third class citizens in the Zionist state and have better material conditions than they do living in camps in the West Bank and in Gaza. But they proved then and until now that actually they have a dream of their own statehood, their own self-determination, their own national dignity, and they have never relinquished that. And those who have been driven outside have never forgotten their homeland and have been a seedbed for Palestinian solidarity and resistance all over the world. So you're absolutely correct to describe Israel as a failing venture. And this fattening up concept is what I'd like to turn to now. There's a limit to how much Israel can fatten up. There are only, 15 million or so Jews in the world. Israel doesn't want citizens that are not Jews. So you've got 15 million tops, 17 million tops, whatever the number is. They simply cannot attract most Jews in the world to come and live there because it's the unsafest place in the world to live as a Jew. They have lost a huge number of people who have fled the country over the last 15 months. Their economic situation is extremely parlous. They have lost tens of billions of dollars over the last 16 months. And so how do you fatten up in these circumstances? Well, isn't it the case that they hoped to recruit more treacherous Arab leaders to be their fat, to fatten them up that way? But that isn't working out too well either, is it?
You're absolutely right, George. I think America's direction under Trump would be turning more towards the kind of large-scale investments, because from his perspective, the military wars have been a sheer and utter failure. I mean, even if you talk about Israel, quote unquote, fattening up via Syria, it was where there was no resistance, right? It managed to grab 1.5 times the landmass of Gaza because there was no effective resistance. But we saw how it was stopped off the front southern border in Lebanon by the very bodies of the Lebanese women who stood in front of the tanks. This is the level that we're talking about, without one single resistant missile being fired on the last Sunday. So this was 9 days ago. That southern Lebanon was liberated through the bodies of the Lebanese women, and tens were martyred in that process. And Trump, in actual fact, only put that deadline day for the withdrawal of Israel from the Lebanese border, I think it's February the 18th, because he realized that actually the situation is very unstable and that the people will continue to resist. So it's exactly that. The fattening up can only happen if there is no resistance. And it's exactly as you mentioned, that demographic failure has to also do with the fact that the Israelis, let's be real, they do not feel safe there, particularly post October the 7th, is completely shattered the concept, the very concept of Israel, which is to be this safe haven. So I think Trump's focus, especially with his kind of win-lose mentality, the way Trump thinks is that for any enterprise for the region that would include their pet project Israel, is it going to win or lose? You know, if if Israel becomes a burden and a problem on America, then he limits it within the American interests. And for that reason, I firmly do believe that I don't think it is likely that the war will continue or the ceasefire will be broken within the future, because it's something that Trump just doesn't want. Trump is not here trying to impress anyone. He's not inherently bound by the Zionist vision. He wants a project to win. If it appears strong and if it wins, then he promotes it. Trump doesn't have this, Biden approach of listen to what we say, otherwise we won't help you. Trump's approach is prove yourself, let's see what you're made of. And if you fail, depending on your level of failure, our support for you will be limited because it's not unconditional. Because it failed on the military ground, it's shifting towards the economic side of things. So, for example, Gaza, Trump spoke about what can we do with Gaza. He's kind of like exploiting the Mediterranean oil beach, turning Gaza into this kind of like booming economic hub, almost like a new Hong Kong in the Middle East, with American companies and corporations at its core. That's his direction. And as you mentioned with the Arab states, Trump's solution to taking Israel out of its predicament includes, Saudi Arabia's official recognition of Israel, the establishment of diplomatic relations, also in the wake of, that $600 billion dollar investment from the United States of America and Saudi Arabia. But this would ultimately just be a case of relations going from being under the table to being over the table. We know that the Abraham Accords couldn't stop October the 7th. Normalization doesn't change the equation in any way. No scheme or collaborators will make Palestine disappear. But I think all of Trump's priorities right now is focusing on restoring America's unipolarity through the economic hegemony. And we see this through Trump threatening BRICS nations against launching a new currency for trade, warning them of 100% tariffs. And many of those BRICS affiliated nations include West Asian nations, so Saudi Arabia and Egypt. So Trump aims to separate Saudi Arabia as a financial power and Egypt as a kind of consumer market from BRICS's monetary ambitions. And the crux of this is to really, I think, block the Chinese investments, to block the Belt and Road Initiative, especially in West Asia, by ensuring a strong Western presence in the region. This is what the Abraham Accords was all about. It was about leveraging Israel rather than this like military base that was turned into a country in 1948. Trump has come forward and said, and says, let's make use of the expertise and the brains that exist within what they consider a Western entity of Israel and link it up with the petrodollar and all of the kind of investments that look very lucrative in this region. Let's create this economic counterbalance to the resistance and effectively swallow it up in that way. Of course, this is what Trump dreams of, but it's exactly as you said, George, none of this makes it an effective, successful reality per se, because the resistance still exists on the ground. Israel's become a pariah, and politics runs on power and ability, and the weak has no place in the world of politics. And if the people of Israel feel effectively not under security, afraid, not protected, nothing's going to stop them from packing their bags and leaving.
Finally, what do you think Netanyahu will be saying to Trump about Iran?
Yes, it's a good question. Regarding Iran, I think here the West feels Iran's influence has become more limited, I think, due to Israel's tactical wins in Lebanon and the extent of, I guess, the security and the intelligence penetration that's present in the first place that enabled those tactical wins. But I think generally speaking, the West, the mood of the West is that it's no longer interested in reaching results via negotiations, but rather through more force. With that being said, I think the option of America using military force is less probable with someone like Trump compared to other Republicans. The likes of Bolton and Pompeo, in the former Trump administration were in that direction, but Trump didn't allow it. And I actually do even believe that if Trump knew that the killing of Soleimani would lead to Iran striking the Ain al-Assad base in Iraq, he probably wouldn't have likely authorized or gone with that military option at the time. So I think Trump will attempt to dialogue under American terms. Negotiations will take a long time, but ultimately they will fail. And they will fail because what the political direction of Iran's government is for the removal of sanctions imposed by America. We also know that Iran's baseline strategy for the past 4 decades has been to expel American imperialism from the region. So when there are these two differing lines, Iran wanting to expel America, America wanting to bring down the Islamic Republic, and there's nothing for both parties to unite on, it's very difficult for them to reach any kind of conclusion. And And I think the strategy defined by Sayyid Khamenei, who's the supreme leader, is not to negotiate with America or to trust America. Rather, he's always prompting the Iranian officials to have more awareness about the methods that America uses, so that the line in Iran that's bending over to negotiate with the West, that's not respected by America. So I think all of this strengthens the line of resistance and the supreme leader in Iran because it ultimately proves their point. But I think based on all of this, we can say that Trump's policies in the region will collapse. He might consider a full regional withdrawal, replacing military presence with maximum sanctions, diplomatic isolation. I think all of that will continue. Pressure on all parties linked to Iran will continue, but ultimately that will only strengthen the China, Russia, Iran alliance, which will significantly weaken US dominance in the region. So yes, of course, Netanyahu still dreams of dragging America into a direct confrontation and war with Iran, but it's baseless. It means nothing. It means nothing because Trump is the most unmanipulated president when it comes to Netanyahu. So I think based on all of these facts, one can expect that Trump will continue in the direction of sanctions remaining, intensifying them in whatever capability he can. The tensions will remain. There will be that regional besiegement. Relations are not going to get better. Trump doesn't favor the military option, but you can't completely rule that out either. But to answer your question, that's what Netanyahu would want. He would want the military option.
Batool Subeiti, thanks for joining us on Have It Out with Galloway. Now, the unique feature of this show is that the audience get to have their say in vision. Let's take the first caller, Nick Fletcher in Malton. Nick, welcome. What would you like to say?
Hello, George. Thanks for having me on the show again. What effect do you think the Trump presidency will have on peace in the Middle East? And what are your thoughts on his comments about moving people from Gaza to other countries?
Well, he's not able to move people from Gaza to other countries. He can wish it, but he can't get the countries to agree to take them. And more importantly, he can't get the people to agree to leave. The Palestinians did not go through everything that they've gone through in order to, get on a coach and go and live in a tent in Sinai, in Egypt, rather than in a tent in Gaza, because they know that when they leave Palestine, they will never return to it. And Trump doesn't understand, you see, because he doesn't have the experience or, for that matter, the fidelity to the land that the Palestinian refugees have had now for best part of 80 years. He doesn't understand that they have gone through all this because they believe. They are religious believers. They are patriotic believers in their own soil, their own land, where their ancestors are buried and where their hearts will always remain. So it falls at these first two hurdles. Nobody will take 2.5, 3.5, 4.5 million Palestinians. No Arab country can afford the treachery involved in saying yes to that proposal by Donald Trump, and the overthrow of their regimes is not a price they're prepared to risk or pay. So I think myself that we will have a continuation. Bear in mind that these parliamentary presidential terms are very, very small and short. Trump is there for 4 years. I've already lived through, as an activist, 50 years of Palestinian activism. A presidential term will come and will go, and we'll have no peace. We might have, as Batool was just outlining, an absence of war, which is not the same thing as peace, but is better than war. There will be no peace unless there is justice. No justice, no peace. And I'm not at all sure that the current balance of power in the region, in the world, is sufficient to win justice. So there will be no peace. What we've got to try and do is bring about an absence of war. Claire Pearsall is in Kent, in England. Claire, what would you like to say?
Hi, George. Good afternoon. I would just
Afternoon.
like to ask you what you believe the effect of President Trump's administration's decision to freeze US aid to the Middle East, especially to countries such as Egypt and Jordan, who are expected to take on the excessive burden of more people should they wish to relocate there.
It's a very good question, and I'm not entirely sure that everything is as it seems, Claire. It's true that they have suspended for a period of 3 months the USAID funding. And it's really interesting, isn't it, how all over the world there is an immediate panic by all these so-called NGOs, all these so-called independent media outlets who have no ability to survive, even for 3 months, a cut in American funding, which tells you how independent they were in the first place and how very far from being non-government organization they were and are. But that doesn't mean that the US will not be funding people in other ways. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, will absorb some of the functions of USAID to continue supporting what they regard as the most important elements of these so-called NGOs, so-called independent media, National Endowment for Democracy, and so on. The satrapies you mentioned, Jordan and Egypt, of course, are dependent entirely on American funding. And unless Trump wants to see the collapse of these two systems, and that's unlikely, at least yet, the day will come when they'll want these people off the stage, and when that happens, as the Afghan president found out, as the Shah of Iran found out, when the United States has no further use for you, you're quite quickly ushered off the stage, but not yet. So they will find other ways of ensuring that the tyrants who rule their countries in America's interest will find a way, will find a teat to continue to suck upon. But nonetheless, in closing down USAID, a number of huge scandals have already emerged. Just in 48 hours, all kinds of people are being unmasked as being on the take from the US taxpayer. And that has quickly become obvious because the withdrawal of the US taxpayer money has brought about an end to the operation of the organization, individual in question. So I say to you, watch this space. You're going to find huge scandals that Trump wants to see exposed. One I'll give you for nothing. It turns out that USAID has been giving massive, multi-million pound sums of money to Tony Blair and somebody called Cherie Blair, who may or may not be Tony Blair's wife. Who knew that the US taxpayer was funding the lifestyle of the Blairs? Well, Mohammed Hadi Doji in Dar es Salaam is up next. Mohammed, where are you? Yes, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, hello, George.
Hi.
Good to be back on your show. So I had a question. What is your take on Donald Trump's approach to the Middle East, particularly his policies on Iran, Syria, Palestine, and Lebanon? Do you think his previous administration's actions have created long-term consequences for the region? And do you think his new administration will implement the same actions and policies, or are you expecting a change in strategies?
Well, the fact that I need to look in the crystal ball to see what Donald Trump will do contrasts with me being able to know what a continuation of the Biden-Harris administration's actions in the region would have been, which is why it's better that we have a change of government in the United States rather than an endorsement by the American electorate of the Biden-Harris era. It's better that we have to take a chance with Trump than that we get more of the same from a President Kamala Harris. I'm completely unembarrassed to say that. Now, that's not the dichotomy I would myself have preferred. I'd rather neither Donald Trump nor Kamala Harris was the president of the US. But given that choice, I'm in no doubt that the unpredictability and, as Batool was just saying, our guest, and the transactional nature, the unideological nature of Donald Trump is better for us than the ideologically committed so-called US Democratic Party. They would do what they had been doing, whether it was in America's interest or not, whether it made money or not, whether it served any of America's overarching strategic goals or not, because they really, really believe in it. Trump doesn't actually believe in anything except Donald Trump. If he has any ideology, it's what is in the interests of America's ruling elite, not what satisfies an ideology, a woke ideology, a liberal imperialist ideology. He doesn't even understand what these ideas and concepts are about. He is a dollar and cents man. Is there anything in this for us? And if he concludes, as Batool was just saying, that actually doubling down forever and a day behind a tiny and necessarily tiny, can never get bigger settler state on the Mediterranean, even at the expense of all America's allies in the region, even at the expense of control of all of the resources in the region, even at the risk of political revolutionary changes in the region that could lose for America everything that it has, there's a chance that Trump will decide that business as usual cannot be allowed to go on. Cedar Bush is in Seattle, Washington. Cedar, welcome to the show. What would you like to say?
I would like to say, I was curious what your opinion on Miriam Adelson's backing of Trump, given her history with supporting Netanyahu in Israel. What, if anything, that will change on Trump's policy on the Middle East, seeing as how she was one of his major backers for his election. And I was wondering what, if any, effect that Elon Musk being a major backer will have on his attitude towards the Middle East.
Well, I think the key word in what you said is the word was. Adelson was one of his key backers, but he's in now. He's the president now. He has no need of Adelson, who may not even be around 4 years from now, but in any case, he will not be a candidate 4 years from now. In politics, the word was, meaning in the past, is a very significant word. What's more important is or is going to be. And you yourself identified Elon Musk, who gave $250 million. Adelson gave Trump $100 million. Musk gave $250 million. And Musk, by the end of this presidential term, is going to be a trillionaire, maybe twice over. And all the billionaires have already fallen into line behind Trump. Look at the parade of former foes like Bezos of Google and the Washington Post, like Zuckerberg of Facebook and Meta. These people who hated Trump with a vengeance are now following him around like lapdogs at his heel, wagging their tail when they think it will please him. So I'm afraid Adelson, she made her investment. She already got paid in the first Trump term with the acceptance of the annexation of the Golan Heights, the moving of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. She'd already been paid for that. I don't think she will be able to get much more. Whereas Musk, you see, Musk was not a full-on Zionist. He is now, but he might not be tomorrow. He was threatened by a Zionist-inspired and organized advertising boycott when he had just bought for $40 billion the Twitter platform, and he made a pilgrimage to Netanyahu to try and get Netanyahu to call off the dogs, which to a certain extent paid off. And so for the last couple of years, or 18 months or so, it's true that Musk has been a loyal foot soldier of Netanyahu, but he might not always be. He, like Trump, has no ideology at all. He comes from a background, his grandfather was a Hitler supporter, a supporter of the Holocaust against, amongst others, the Jewish people. So I don't think that Netanyahu can sleep quite as soundly in his bed, sure of the support of the Trump, Musk, etc., and Vance for that matter, very devout and quite theological, Roman Catholic. I don't think that they can be as confident about this new mob on the Potomac as they were about the previous one. But time will tell. Mohammed Salim is in Prague in the Czech Republic. Mohammed, what would you like to say?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. George, for having me. And I would like to take a moment to thank your team for always organizing in a beautiful way and always keeping us in touch regarding the schedule and everything. And my question is regarding APEC. During the election period, we have heard a lot about the impact and role APEC plays in terms of funding. Does that has any part to play in Donald Trump's party also? And during the election, I was following you, which was a little bit towards Donald Trump like aligned side, as well as I was listening to Mehdi Hassan, who was against Donald Trump. But looking at the policies and thinking of Donald Trump, looks like it's not going the right way so far. So what would you like to say about that?
Well, neither of, the policies of Donald Trump and the policies of Kamala Harris on the Middle East were virtually identical, except Trump was going to demand an immediate ceasefire and got one. So Mehdi Hassan was talking through his backside, I'm afraid, on that. If Harris had won, there would be no ceasefire in Gaza. There would be no ceasefire in Lebanon, and there is. So the policy of AIPAC is very successful. They own the American parliamentary congressional landscape, almost irrespective of who is in the White House. It is quite possible that Trump could take a turn against Netanyahu, but be stymied and blocked by congresspeople that most of you have never heard of. I have never heard of people, never heard their names spoken. But when you look at the take that they're on from AIPAC, that's the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, it is in the millions. I mean, people, unknown mediocrities, receive millions from the Israel lobby in the United States, and they sing for their supper. They sing on cue. They will be, if Netanyahu gives them the opportunity to, up on their feet like clapping seals, hailing him like he was Julius Caesar. That's the kind of control that the Israel lobby has over its public representatives in the USA. Now, the Israel lobby, I need to keep stressing this, is not the same thing as a Jewish lobby. Most Zionists are not Jews, and many Jews are not Zionists. It's important always to remember that the most fervent, feverish, fanatical supporters of Israel in the United States are evangelical Christians. Let's go to London. Andrew Thompson is up next. Andrew, what would you like to say?
Hi, George. Thanks for having me on again. A very simple question this time. Do you think with the ceasefire or anything, there's any chance of Marwan Barghouti or Ahmad Sadat being released?
Well, Marwan Barghouti is a particular hero of mine, a friend of mine, and I'm a friend of his family of many decades standing. He is involved in the negotiation. He is on the list of prisoners that the resistance demand to be freed. I pray, literally pray, that Marwan Barghouti is released, because if he is, it will be the end of the quisling. I use that word, I'm reluctant to do so. The quisling presidency of Abbas and the so-called Palestine National Authority in Ramallah will be the end of them. Because Marwan Barghouti is the only person who can bridge all the Palestinian factions and bring them together in a national unity government, a national unity front. He also has the, I presume, of course I haven't seen him since more than 20 years, he's been behind bars, but I believe from his family that he still has the dynamism, still has the vitality to kickstart some kind of political alternative, some kind of political process that can lead to resolution. And so for all these reasons, I'm sorry to say, I don't think he'll be released. I'll be very surprised if Israel releases him. I'll be very surprised if Abbas is not behind the scenes trying to stop Israel from releasing him. He's been at the top, number one, on any number of prisoner exchange lists so far already, and has not been released. So I pray for his release, but I'm afraid I'm not expecting his release. And it would be dishonest of me to pretend to you otherwise. Thanks for asking about Marwan Barghouti, the Nelson Mandela of Palestine. Let's go to my old stamping ground of Rochdale, where Shireen Akhtar has a question. Yes, my dear, lovely to see you again.
Thank you, sir. You all right?
Yes, all good, thank you.
Right. Mr. George, the question is, why does Trump want a meeting in Washington?
Sorry, say that again?
Why does Trump want a meeting in Washington?
With Netanyahu?
Yes.
Oh, I think Netanyahu was determined that he would be the first foreign leader that Donald Trump met. And I think it's unfortunate that Trump has done that. It sends a very bad signal that of all the people in all the world that he could have met with, he meets with the last guy who met the last guy. He meets with the leader of a country who's on the wanted list, who's wanted by Interpol, for whom there's an arrest warrant outstanding, and gives them the full military honors and so on. But I'll tell you what, he might be meeting to give him bad news. Don't rule out the possibility that Netanyahu goes away with a flea in his ear. Don't rule out the possibility that Netanyahu is disappointed with what Trump has to say to him, because that has happened before. Now, Trump is a guy who wants to be the only show in town. That's why people like Elon Musk and so on had better be very careful the way they're appearing to upstage Donald Trump. Trump doesn't like to be upstaged. And in the past, in the previous presidency, he was well unhappy with Netanyahu on a number of occasions. I happen to know, for personal reasons, through personal channels of communication, that Trump doesn't like Netanyahu. That doesn't mean he won't do everything he can to help him. That doesn't mean that we'll not be bitterly angry with things that Trump says and does in relation to Netanyahu. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that unlike Biden, who spent 55 years as a servant of Zionism, Trump isn't one of those. Trump never said a word about Israel-Palestine before 2016, and he's a man in his late 70s. Biden spent more than 50 years saying things like, if Israel didn't exist, America would have to invent it. He spent more than 50 years earning his spurs as a zealot of the Zionist cause. Trump's not like that. He doesn't have any causes. He doesn't actually believe in anything or anybody. So he's a pragmatist. And if Netanyahu is coming to Washington to get Trump involved in more and more trouble with no profit at the end of it, my prediction is that Trump will send him on his way disappointed. But I wish that he told Netanyahu, well, cool your heels for a bit, mate. You've already cost us plenty as a country over the last few years. We've sent you a one hell of a lot of money. Give me a break. Let me meet some less offensive people than you in the first few weeks of my presidency. That's what I would have done if I was Donald Trump. But then I ain't no Donald Trump, bruv. Well, look, it's been marvelous. I hope you agree. It was marvelous to present this show today. I hope it was a joy to watch and that you found something that was entertaining and educational about it. If you want to join this great television show, this unique television show, write to us at haveitoutwithgalloway.com. Until next week at the same time, in the same place, I bid you a goodbye.